I come to the floor today to talk about an issue that I've been working on for 2 years, namely ending the arbitrary process through which our own government takes away the Second Amendment rights of veterans. Let me briefly describe what I mean about this issue. As most of my colleagues know, the Federal Gun Control Act prohibits the sale of firearms to certain individuals, including convicted felons, fugitives, drug users, illegal aliens, and individuals who have been, and I quote, adjudicated as a mental defective. Furthermore, the Gun Control Act prohibits possession of firearms by any of these classified individuals. Needless to say, it's a serious matter. Criminal prosecution is an option against those who violate the law. The Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act requires the government to maintain a database of these individuals, and we call this the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS. The Brady Law and the NICS database aim to prevent those who may pose a danger to society or to themselves of purchasing a firearm. Gun owners reference to the NICS screen customers. Again, it goes without saying that it's a serious matter to have one's name on NICS. Every American should expect a rigorous and fair process before their right to bear arms is taken away, especially when criminal prosecution is involved. Unfortunately, when it comes to certain veterans, their spouses, their dependent children, their dependent parents, the process is neither rigorous nor fair. Since 1999, now 10 years, the Veterans Administration has sent the names of 116,000 of its beneficiaries to the FBI for inclusion under the NICS list. Again, the NICS list means those 116,000 individuals can never purchase a firearm. None of these names were sent to the FBI because they were determined to be criminals or a danger to themselves or, for that fact, a danger to others. They were listed in NICS because they couldn't manage their own financial affairs. Mr. President, we shouldn't take away a constitutional right because someone can't balance their checkbook on time. VA's review process for assigning a fiduciary is meant to determine one's financial responsibility in managing VA-provided cash assistance such as disability compensation, pension payments, and other benefits. For example, a veteran may be assigned a fiduciary if they have a credit problem. VA focuses on whether or not benefits paid by the VA will be spent in a manner for which they were intended to spend. Well, if you held that threshold to every veteran, you would probably assign a fiduciary to all of them because we don't know, in fact, where those payments go or what they're intended for. Nothing involved in the VA's appointment of a fiduciary even gets to the question, is an individual a danger to themselves or others, or whether the person should or should not own a firearm. Yet, Mr. President, that's exactly what happens when the VA appoints a fiduciary to one of our nation's veterans. Let me put a human face on the issue if I can. I'm going to read excerpts from a letter I received from Jennifer Breest, and I have her approval to read it. Jennifer's the wife of Corey Breest. Corey served in Iraq. He was a paramedic. He was severely injured in an IED explosion in 2004, which caused severe burns, damage to his lungs, severe traumatic brain injury after shrapnel entered his skull. Corey spent the last 5 years recovering from his injuries. Jennifer reports that he's walking, talking, enjoying life at home with his 2 children. Now it gets really sad. Because of his head injury, Corey still requires help with certain things. VA said he needed help managing his disability compensation payments. and they named Jennifer as fiduciary, his spouse. That's where I'd like to read from her letter. And again, I quote from her letter. On May 19, 2009, we were at our annual fiduciary meeting with the VA field examiner. At the end of the meeting, our field examiner said that he needed to read a statement to us. He read the Brady Bill statement. And then he stated that Corey can't own, possess, use, be around, etc., any firearm. He then went on to say that anyone in our household can't own a gun while living in the household. I asked him about Corey going on adaptive hunting trips, and he said he couldn't. Corey stated that he had a gun that was handed down from his grandfather and that Corey was going to hand it down to his son, and the field examiner told him that he couldn't have it. He stated to Corey that if he did own a gun or be around a gun, that he would be threatened with imprisonment. The way that field examiner talked to Corey about this issue was not appropriate. The field examiner said that I could challenge it and handed me a blank sheet of paper with VA heading. I asked the field examiner for the statement he read to me, but he said that he had to ask his boss if he could actually provide a copy of that statement. After 2 weeks of me emailing him, he finally got the attached papers in the mail. I think the VA's taking this way out of concept and would greatly appreciate your support. Well, now in case my colleagues think that the government would never prosecute somebody like Corey Breest for possession of a firearm, being around a firearm, I'd like to read to my colleagues excerpts from a VA directive that it went out to all VA regional offices on September 29th, this year, on this very issue. The directive is meant to inform fiduciary field examiners of their obligation if they were to witness a violation of the Brady Act. I'm going to quote from this VA memorandum to their field examiners. Quote, field examiners or other VA employees who encounter beneficiaries believed to be in violation of the Brady Act are required to notify the fiduciary activity manager as soon as safely possible. At no time should the employee place him or himself in danger. The fiduciary activity manager at the VA Regional Office of Jurisdiction must immediately report the alleged violation to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, 1-800-ATF-GUNS. That's straight out of the Department of Veterans Affairs memorandum to their field examiners. Now, Mr. President, for 2 years, I have gone through this in the VA committee. I have tried to plead with my colleagues that this is a broach of the Second Amendment of our country's veterans, that no veteran who has had their name reported of the 116,000 have ever been judged by a court to have a mental defection. That in most cases, this is because there's a fiduciary need to make sure that they stay up to date. But there's not an incapacity on their part that has been judged to be a flaw in their judgment. Quite frankly, Mr. President, I find it offensive. I find the language of this directive offensive because the premise seems to be that our veterans are dangerous. But as I mentioned, there's nothing about the current process that even gets to the question of an individual as dangerous. The current process is also a double standard. Only VA beneficiaries fall under these guidelines. The Social Security Administration assigns fiduciaries to help beneficiaries every single day, yet it doesn't send their name to the NICS list. We've got a policy on the books that discriminates against individuals because they wore our nation's uniform, because they fought on behalf of this country. I find it unacceptable, and it must end. Mr. President, I have a bill, S-669, that would prohibit the VA from continuing this arbitrary and unfair practice. It would require a judge, a magistrate, or another judicial authority to determine that a VA beneficiary is a danger to themselves or to others before their name could be sent to the NICS list. Twice the Veterans Affairs Committee approved this bipartisan legislation to afford veterans with due process before their Second Amendment right was snapped away from them. But twice the bill has languished on the Senate floor. S-669 was approved unanimously by the committee back in May, but it's gone nowhere. And the question is, can veterans wait any longer, or should veterans wait any longer? I'm not here to ask that we put guns in the hands of dangerous people. I'm here to ask you, plead with you, that we treat veterans fairly and that their rights are protected like every other citizen. Many of our veterans organizations and other groups agree with me. The Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act has the support of the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, AMVETS, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the National Alliance of Mental Health, the National Rifle Association, the Gun Owners of America. I plead with my colleagues, ask for S-669 to be brought to the floor. Don't sit back and say that this is just an obscure thing that the VA sometimes engages in and sometimes doesn't. Again, September 29th, 2009, 1 month ago, this directive goes out. Subject, reporting violations of Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. This letter provides guidance to our field personnel who may encounter violations by a veteran who served his country, is not a danger to himself or to anybody else, but has been deemed to need fiduciary help, even if it's a spouse. And his Second Amendment right was yanked from his hands, and now the VA administration says to their field examiners, report it because we will prosecute these individuals. Well, I'm not exactly sure, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, how to respond to Jennifer Breest. That letter she sent me about Corey, who continues to make progress after an IED explosion December 4th, 2005. How do you say to a kid that served his country, that's raising a family, one, we had to turn you in so you can never own a gun. Two, that gun your father handed down to you, Corey, you got to get rid of it. You can't hand it down to your child. Because even if you handed it down today, your son living in your home can't have that gun because the Veterans Administration says you can't. But if a fiduciary was assigned to Corey's father or to his mother, Social Security Administration doesn't send that into the NICS list to deprive them of their Second Amendment right. This is the most unfair thing I have seen this country do. It is time we end this practice. It is time we respect our veterans. It is time that we treat them fairly. It is time we uphold the Constitution of this United States. I yield the floor.